Hello, everyone, and welcome to our SETI Live. I'm Sarah Jennings with Frontier Development Lab, and really excited to have you here today as I have one of the FDL Europe teams with me. Frontier Development Lab is an applied artificial intelligence research accelerator, and we bring PhDs and postdocs from all around the world to tackle challenges in space science and exploration utilizing machine learning. And so today I have with me an awesome team. We are in week 8. This is our last week together, and these teams have worked extremely hard. So I'm very excited that they're taking the time to have this conversation with us today. So welcome, FDL Europe payload team. I have Anna, Vit, Daniele, and James with me. So thank you so much for joining. To kick us off, I'd like to better understand your challenge and why it's important. So to kick us off, I'd like to have James, if you'd be willing to share with us.
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much. So our challenge is around basically giving satellites the ability to interpret the images that they gather. So we have satellites continuously orbiting and observing the Earth, but they beam down the images which they gather without actually considering the content of those images. The satellite doesn't know if it's seeing something which is important or something that is just completely expected. So it means that it can't make decisions based on what's actually in the images which it's observed. So one of the things we'd like to be able to do is be able to flag an image to see if it's interesting, whether it's actually going to give us more or novel information. And so if we had that kind of thing on the satellite, if the satellite was able to actually tell us that, then we could take the most interesting images and prioritize them, basically download them faster, download them first. So one of the things which you kind of need to know is that satellites, like they don't always have the ability to downlink images, to download images to the Earth. So especially for some of the smaller satellites, like cube satellites, basically they'd have to download to these ground stations, which look like this. So there's these basically these big satellite dishes, which connect to the satellites, funnily enough. And so they can only downlink whenever they're over one, basically. And so it means that we can have some latency between whenever we see an image from the satellite and whenever we actually receive it on ground. And so it's basically, how do we optimize there? And how do we make sure that we're downloading the most important, most interesting images first? And so in terms of like what makes an image interesting, the way we think of it is in terms of change. Has something changed in that image, which I think is quite a natural way to think of it. So that could be like a storm system has come through and like flooded a region, or a fire has come through and burnt an area, or drought conditions have got worse or better, something like that. So everything that I think we'd be interested in satellite imagery, in seeing in satellite images, can be framed as like a change. The interesting part is the change. And so this would be really important to, say, first responders, especially to like really rapidly changing events like wildfires, which move really, really fast, or for like sudden events like landslides, whenever we need to get a response out there really quickly. So yeah, everything which is interesting in a satellite photo, we're framing as change. And what we want to do is make the satellite be able to detect that change and do something with it. And so on top of these like dramatic events, it could also be good for the satellite in terms of just its general operation. So if it sees a photo and goes, there's not much interesting change there, it means that it can prioritize downloading images from other places, because you have to pay for your downlink, basically. You have to build more dishes, and there are the people that operate on charge for the downlink. So it's kind of basically having a filter there. Some part of the system which is intelligent and goes, yeah, this is worth downloading. People will want to see this. That's our challenge.
Great. Thank you so much, James, for that explanation. I think it's really interesting that you guys have such a unique challenge. A lot of our teams are, utilizing data that they're getting from the satellites, but you guys are actually taking a different perspective and actually really thinking more about the satellite itself and how to use these different capabilities. So really interesting challenge. I also want to welcome our audience members. It looks like we have Ecuador, Indiana. Thank you all for joining. And if you do have any questions at any point in time, please share those with us. And at the end, we might have some time for some Q&A. So James, you had mentioned a little bit about detecting these changes And I was hoping that maybe Daniele, you could talk a little bit about how you're detecting them and what techniques you guys are using.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the question. I would just go on and share my screen. If James, can you? Thank you. Here it is. I hope you can see two images. So first of all, let's define what a change is and, for example, what an anomaly is, which are two different things in our opinion. Here we can see two images of the same location, exactly the same location at two different points in time. And in here, we can see, for example, one kind of change, which is one of the, let's say, events we want to be able to spot, which is a flood. This example, it is very clear. It is like in the center of the image, the river changed shape, thickness, and color, right? But it is not the only change we can see here, actually. There is another one, which is snow, just the snow falling on a mountain. So the first one, we can actually say it is an anomaly because it's something which is not common, right? We can't really say that a snow on a mountain, and I would say in that specific mountain as well, is an anomaly, but it is still change and it is meaningful in that, and we want to be able to spot it so that we can anyway download it to the ground. So the first way, the easiest way I can think of doing so is to gather an image of a specific location to the satellite and then compare it with the same position in an image with from a previous sample from a previous time. So for example, we can literally like take in the pixel values and subtract them, because at the end images are just numbers, right? And depending on how much it changed, we can decide to prioritize it for downlink or just download it if there is time or if there is enough bandwidth. And then we can just decide to take the new image and make it the old image so that the next time that we see the same location, we can compare it against it, right? So the problem that we see here is that if we take pixel by pixel, there may be some stark difference in the appearance of the same location, even if no change actually happened. For example, if just a difference in lighting condition can make a very stark difference in appearance, right? So we want to have something which is more robust. And we decided to go for machine learning approach. We had some requirements in the sense that we needed something that is that gives us meaningful information out of the image, because we want to be able to compare it with the old ones. We need something that doesn't require much human intervention, because we want to be able to do so without real supervision from the operators, so that we are not biasing it, for example, to detect one kind of change instead of the other. And we want it to be as simple and as efficient as possible, because we wanted to deploy it on a satellite, and there are further constraints there. So we decided to go for a note encoder technique, and more in particular, actually, a variation note encoder. So just to explain how this works, we have as input the satellite image, or in our case, a tile of it, so a small portion of it. And through some filters, we compress it, or we encode it into a smaller representation that then can be decompressed or decoded to reconstruct the original image. So this is the way you train an autoencoder. You start from an image, you compress it, and then you go on and try to reconstruct the original one. So the idea is that the same information that you have in your input image should be contained in the bottleneck or in the latent space over here, although it is a smaller set of numbers, right? This means that this smaller set of numbers needs to have a more dense information. For example, we can think about it as, instead of describing the image, describing what it contains, like snow on top of the mountain or flood, right? But instead of being made of words, it will be made of a set of vectors. So the idea is that even if the appearance of a location changes, the content of this location doesn't change, or if it changes, we want to flag it. So this latent space is more robust to appearance changes. Once this autoencoder is trained, we can actually make it more efficient for our specific purpose, because we are not interested in reconstructing the original image, but we are interested only in the latent representation. So it means we can deploy on the satellite just half of the network that we trained. In our specific case, we are using a variational autoencoder, which is very similar to what I described, but there are further constraints on the way the latent space is constructed, and these ways are made of statistical theory. That is the idea. So now that we've trained an encoder that can compress our image that we gather from the satellite into a smaller representation, we can actually compare it against an older representation, the representation of an older image, and do exactly the same pattern as I described before. There is another thing that we actually do, which is instead of comparing against a single image from the past, we keep more than one image so that we are even more robust to small appearance changes. And then instead of replacing the image, we just replace the oldest one with the new one we gather from the satellite. That's it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for talking about how you are able to detect those changes and then also determining which images to downlink and which ones to not. So that was a really great explanation. And then I would like to learn a little bit more about the type of data that you are utilizing. And so, Anna, I'm hoping that you can share a little bit more about that and where it comes from.
Sure. So for this challenge, one of our outcomes has been developing a new data set to evaluate these unsupervised change detection models on, because there wasn't really anything that we could use from previous data sets. So for this, we decided to use Sentinel-2 multispectral imagery, and that's at about 10 meters resolution. So it's really, really high resolution. And there's also 13 different channels. So there's a lot of information in any one of those images. For the data that we trained the unsupervised model on, we just selected 200 different scenes, and they were quite large scenes, and then we divided them up into smaller tiles for the training. We then made a validation data set, and for that we identified 5 different classes of particular types of change that we could be really useful for end users. So we're particularly interested in natural disasters, because that's a scenario where being able to get the data quicker would be really beneficial to disaster management agencies. So we have those 5 classes, and for each class, we identified a couple of different examples of changes and got 5 images in a time series where 4 are before an event and 1 is after the event. And these are just some examples of these validation classes. So we picked hurricanes, landslides, fires, oil spills, and floods. And on the top are some images taken before an event, and on the bottom are images after the event. So you can see there's some really quite significant changes. And that's what we're trying to train our unsupervised model to be able to pick up to downlink for end users who need it.
Great. Thank you so much, Anna. And those look like really important events. So I'm really excited that you guys are working on this challenge. So for your particular project, I was hoping that you could talk a little bit more about the hardware constraints, since running a model on Earth is quite different than running something on board in space. So Fit, would you be able to share a little bit more on that?
Yes, thank you. Okay, I will try to share my screen. And all right, so yeah, hello everyone. My name is Vitek or Vit, and yeah, let's talk about some hardware. Well, I don't know how much knowledge you may have in machine learning in general, but quite often what we use with these models is sort of this having some servers which have a very large amount of compute. So basically, it's like rooms of computers with tons of GPUs. If you are ever using something like Google Colaboratory, that's what you would be logging into. And if you have like a gaming laptop, basically you would have similar high power GPU, but these tend to be quite like energy consume quite a lot of energy. And in particular, they don't fly on satellites. And so our kind of challenge on this whole in this whole project is also not only to figure out how to do the task that we decided to do, but also how to kind of compress everything into a smaller device. And so we are in fact not using a Howell-sized computers, but this tiny board which our advisor Chris Bridges is holding in his hands. So it's hand-sized sort of device where everything is running just on this board. This board is called Xilinx Pink, which I have butchered right now, the name of, which is a FPGA board, and it's a sort of an alternative approach on what to use for evaluating these models. And there is a sort of ongoing discussion in the discipline whether to use GPUs or FPGAs, and I think I'm not capable to split this discussion and solve it, but basically some of the advantages of the FPGA board are that it is more resilient to sort of space environment. So if there, so basically radiation with GPUs, they are more prone to something kind of like hitting some radiation and something hitting the board and like flipping bits in places you don't want them to be flipped. And even more so, actually, like people have way more control over these devices rather than in the FPGA, in the GPUs. So that is one kind of like motivation for us to use this. Well, there are a couple of caveats, right? So we have much lower compute, we have much smaller memory, but there are some advantages to this as well. We have much smaller size of the actual thing that will run this, so it can fit in a satellite, right? And also it's more, it can be more energy efficient. And yeah, as such, these are being used on majority of existing imaging satellites. So also the ESA's missions, VSAT and OPSAT. And what we managed to do is to, for now, just run some PyTorch, so Python machine learning library called PyTorch code directly on these on their processors. And there are sort of like more details in how this code would be then moved into the FPGA logic, which is kind of like a programmable field that would be doing the computations super efficiently and even better than what we are doing right now. But it's kind of like opened working problem for us to solve, I think, in the coming days. Not something for 8 weeks, definitely. Well, so what we have done during this whole sprint is to kind of keep these limitations in mind already when designing this model. Again, I'm not sure how much understanding of machine learning models you might have, but there are some which are super huge, and then basically they have like millions of parameters, and the size of them can be talked about in depth and in width, and basically in the number of parameters that they have. So number of, or maybe a number of operations that you need to process when going through from the image into your prediction. And so there are, when making these models, you can kind of like create smaller models or larger models depending on what you want, and try to measure the performance that these models would have. So either the speed or actually these kind of like the score. So so these are some of the kind of first results that we have on the pink board, where we are looking at this graph where speed lower is obviously better. This would be in seconds, and then AUC score is some sort of scoring that we have when comparing like the predictions of the models with the labeled ground truths. We have tested 3 different types of models. Let's call them large, medium, and small. And we can see that, and yeah, the circle size, by the way, is the number of parameters. So the super huge one is actually the best performing one on this on this training kind of experiment. It was the best performing one. However, it was also evaluating at like 27 seconds per single large image, so per single large area. And by kind of like playing around with the different weights, we were able to downscale it into much smaller model, which has basically roughly thirds size of the amount of parameters, but is evaluating at 5 seconds, which is much better than before. And so what you can see kind of here is that we are kind of playing this trade-off between model complexity and sort of how well can it learn, and the speed that how fast can it run. And we think that there will be some sort of sweet spots here, which we need to still find, where like one particular architecture will be doing kind of hitting both of the ends possibly, or maybe we will find something which is good enough for us but runs quite fast. So yes, that's for the hardware.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ben. And you guys, it sounds like you have a lot of things to consider when you're developing these models, everything from the size of the hardware you're going to use, the power constraints, even radiation. So lots of things for you guys to consider. I wanted to ask you, we're in the final week, and I know you guys are still hard at work while we're preparing for our showcase, which is going to be this Friday, August 13th. But I was hoping you might be able to share with us some initial results.
Yes, okay, so I can again take over the screen and show you some results. I guess so now we kind of we can continue this game of looking at an image before and after and trying to hit and spot the differences, right? So something that Daniel was showing at the beginning. And in doing so, we will also show what our models actually, how well they behave. Well, so there are different cases where we have been evaluating these. So this is an example of image before and then after. So an example with a flood event happening, where we can see that there is a lot of kind of muddy water, but also just some areas are changing where the water is, and maybe there is much more water in some regions because they would get flooded. And there is another example of different type of disaster of a kind of wildfire, where we are looking at the images before and after, and there is quite large burnt area here. And so even when looking at it with our human eyes, it's quite maybe hard to detect or find these changes. So we, for visualization, we have this ground truth here that is kind of telling us which areas are actually the ones where there has been a change. And this is the prediction of our model. And maybe here I will kind of again repeat what has been said before, is that we are training these models without any access to these labels, because this is quite expensive for humans to just like go through, annotate everything. And we have done it for some example to evaluate on, but not, it would be quite a large amount of work to do to label kind of like large enough training set. So all of these, all of our models are trained on basically just this sort of proxy task of reconstructing images, and never have seen this type of ground truths. Nevertheless, because of the way how we are comparing the representations, as was explained before, we can now actually like get these values which are hinting where there is some change possibly. So this would be example of floods and burnt areas. We have more in the events of hurricanes and landslides. So again, this is image before and image after the event. So a kind of normal area before, but then after there is quite large sort of like, deforestation and lot of quite large area that has been hit by this hurricane. And in this case, it's even more extreme because where there has been a river, there is river no more because of this landslide. So basically quite a harsh change to the whole landscape. And again, when we can like look at these labels that we are comparing against, but then we can look at what the model is predicting, and it is kind of highlighting some areas of the change in the image. Right. So maybe the point I wanted to make with this set of images is that our method is also quite general because it's not linked to one particular type of event. It's not linked to just floods or just fires. It can kind of detect changes across these different types. So there are kind of some problems with this generality, right? Because in theory, let's look at this example, but you have an image before and image after. There has been a flooding event occurring, so there is kind of like quite large flooded area. Actually, if you look at the ground truth, you can see that there is a bunch of smaller places which have been flooded over the image. But then if we look at the prediction of our model, we are detecting some of these areas maybe quite well, some are maybe sort of lost, but we are also quite like firing upon this area down here in the sea. And yeah, it is quite a strange prediction, because then when we look at it, it's actually like predicting this muddy sea water outflow, which is yeah, I don't know, and kind of actually it is maybe a good thing that this is detecting it, because while it is not in the ground truth, because we have not manually edited it there, it is not the flooding type of event that we care about in this evaluation. However, it is possibly quite a good indicator that some flooding has occurred upstream, because if there is mud in the water here, something might have been kind of flooded here and taken some amount of muddy water, which has not been usual for the place. So in this case, this general approach can lead to kind of some intelligent discovery of kind of unexpected findings in the landscape. And we can end with a sort of more challenging example, and a place where actually our model is kind of failing in a way. And let's look at this example. So we have a photo, or like a picture of the location before, and then a picture of the location after. And in this case, what has changed is a mixture, right? So quite maybe easily we can spot these places where there has been ice and it has melted. So now there are kind of like just lakes. And so we would even say that this is maybe just natural change, right? Melting ice, it's something that is maybe kind of like normal with this on Earth. And so, but there is also a change which is highlighted here, which is an oil spill. So when you look at this example of the water here and then compare it with here, there's actually quite a lot of oil having been spilled across the area. And then when we look at the predictions, well, the model is most active or most actively firing upon the areas where there has been the melting event change. So because we are generic, we have not kind of fine-tuned it into considering only this one type of event. We are detecting all sorts of changes. In case of these two images, it might be firing upon the wrong type of change. And so, of course, there are solutions for this problem. One of them could be actually including quite like larger time series of data from this location. So maybe if we had enough data of this location, we would learn that this having ice melting is probably quite natural thing. So maybe that would be normal. Or if we don't want to go this way, we can also go in sort of another direction. So until now, everything has been unsupervised, meaning no one has given it any label of like, I want this type of change. But for this type of kind of tasks, we might actually want to give the model some sort of examples of the locations that we care about. So the type of change that we care about, which would be sort of oil spills in this case. So maybe examples from tiles here and tiles here. This type of change is something that we care about. And the model could be kind of fine-tuned into focusing on these areas and ignoring other types of changes. And I guess this would lead us into the kind of a new scientific domain, which would be kind of few-shot learning. But yeah, it would be still possible and maybe quite useful for the end users of this of our model. Okay, I think that's it for the results.
Great, thank you. Thanks for sharing some of the initial results, and I'm really excited to see where you guys take this work. So now I'm going to switch gears a little bit and ask you each a question. So I think that this is a fascinating challenge, and I'd like to know from you why you are personally interested in this challenge and working on this work this summer. So to kick us off, who would like to go first? Anna?
Sure. So for me, I find this really cool because it opens up a whole new range of applications for remote sensing data, where previously it just hasn't been possible to downlink the data fast enough to monitor these rapidly evolving events in real time. And I personally live in an area where we have a real problem with wildfires. So I'm particularly excited about it from that perspective, because I think there's so many parts of wildfire management that could really be helped by this new work.
Yeah, that's very true. Thank you so much, Anna. And next, would we like to have James? Are you good to go?
Yep, I can go next. Yeah, I really like the application of like machine learning and AI and like a lot of new technology to specifically to areas that hopefully do good for people. And so I thought this project was really nice for that, because we're talking about natural disasters and we're talking about like using these like modern machine learning techniques to kind of be involved in that space, which is where I hope they belong. So yeah, I really like that part of it, just kind of the whole motivation.
Yeah, that's really great. Thanks, James. And next we'll go to Bit.
Yeah, I think I can just like sort of join in this the same type of motivation. I enjoy to work with problems which have sort of real world application. So and I'm kind of hoping that as we progress with this project, it will be used somewhere, or maybe the lessons that we have learned here will be used somewhere, so that will influence some sort of models that are deployed eventually somewhere, and it could kind of help benefit people. So yeah, machine learning for good, machine learning for societal sort of impact, and not just for not for academia only, but kind of also see some direct applications of it.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Bit. It's definitely work that is benefiting all of humanity. So it's really important work that you guys are doing. And Daniele.
Yeah, I cannot agree more with what my colleagues just said. I mean, we're talking about something that could actually make a change, right? And also something that potentially could go up to a satellite, which is cool by itself.
Yeah, that's so true. What's cooler than working on something that is going to potentially be deployed on a satellite? I mean, it's amazing that what you guys are doing. And you guys are also getting to work with the European Space Agency. You're getting to utilize resources from NVIDIA Scan and Google Cloud, and you're getting support from all of our other partners that are on the screen there as well, and in partnership with the University of Oxford. So it's just been really incredible to be able to work with you and with all of our partners. So my last question is, we've been through 8 weeks together plus our boot camp, and I wanted to know from each of you, what is one of the most interesting things that you have learned during FDL? Fit, do you want to go?
Yeah, I could start. Well, I don't know, I will start with the teamwork makes the dream work. But there are some caveats to this. There are sort of amazing gains that you can get from team really working together, but also some problems if the team is not working together. And this has been, I don't know, very good learning experience, how to kind of collaborate, communicate inside the team to reach some progress.
That's great insight. And you guys also have extreme time zone differences as well that you guys are managing just fantastically. So well done to you all. And next up, James.
Yeah. So I'm going to take a slightly different approach, but I thought one of the most interesting things that I came across during this project is just something totally small and random, but it's like sort of learning more about the hardware. And so like stuff I've worked with before is more around the data and like the algorithms, and just learning more about like what these devices even look like that we're running them on. Like you think about a computer and it can just be a box. It's somewhere else. You log onto it. It doesn't really matter. But like actually seeing them and like kind of thinking about the difficulty of actually running something in space, and talking about how, you know, stuff you wouldn't think about, like how space radiation, like stuff from the sun is like can actually affect the computer such that it crashes. And so you need to have computers which are robust to that and won't crash. And then we have our atmosphere, which stops all that radiation getting down to affect them on Earth. And yeah, I like the hardware side of things. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, those are really good observations. And especially like utilizing Google Cloud and things like that, you don't necessarily think about the hardware behind everything that you're using. So it's great insights. And next, Anna, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So I think the thing I've really enjoyed is learning more about unsupervised learning, and particularly with such an interesting question. That's not something that I'd really come across before. So that's been really cool. And also just having the opportunity to be involved in the whole FDL community, because we've got a whole lot of different teams all working on different projects. and people all around the world who are all interested in applications of machine learning for space science. So it's been really cool this summer just getting to know everyone.
That's great. Thank you, Anna. And Daniele.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all the comments we had so far, and also all the different aspects and anecdotes about satellites and different applications and everything that comes out, or even just thinking about strange things like radiation that will affect your hardware, which is a completely different point of view from what you usually have.
Yeah, very true. Thank you, Daniele. And it looks like we have one question from the audience before we wrap. So I will go ahead and ask that. What kinds of compute nodes do you have available to you within Google Cloud? How many cores? How much RAM? And Vit or James?
Okay, I can take this one. Well, so we are using the sort of standardized machine that you can rent, which is the N1 standard 16, which means 16 CPUs, 60 gigabytes of memory, and yeah, and most importantly, two V100 GPUs. And I would like to maybe like make a note with this that this is quite useful to have for training and to like test a lot of different types of models at once, maybe train like a bunch of them and then test them out. But in theory, similar, yeah, I could probably train similar models on my older sort of like maybe even a gaming PC or something like that. And you even could get access to these similar sort of spec machines if you use Google Colab, which is like a interactive screen where you can just like play around with one of these sort of GPUs as well. Yeah, I mean, and there is like a difference between training a model, which requires quite a lot of compute, which is why we are doing it on Google Cloud, and then deploying it on something else that can require quite little, as little as you saw before.
Great. Thank you so much, Vit. And thank you to our audience for joining us today. And thank you so much for the ML Payload team. It was really exciting having a conversation with you today during this very busy week. So I really hope that all of our audience joins us for our live stream on August 13th, where we'll be sharing both the FDL Europe work in the morning, and then we will be having the FDL US showcase. And I will be back later this week with our FDL US partners to have an exciting discussion around space exploration. So with that, thank you to everybody, and have a good day.